Okay, good morning, everyone. I still see we have some people filtering in, but do have most people online, so we're going to kick it off. I'm David Corelli, part of the SMCC Education Committee, and pretty pleased today to bring you the first in what will be an upcoming series of webinars and digital content from the SMCC during these unprecedented times. Obviously, we're used to gathering live and for our monthly forums, and now we're all sheltering in place, but there are a bunch of silver linings, that everyone can take away from this experience, that are individual. And I think for the MCCC, it's the ability for us to bring our national groups all together and all of our chapters. So, today it's not only a Toronto-based or a West Coast or an East Coast thing, but it is all the chapters. So we're welcoming Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver, and Montreal to our first webinar today, and allowing all of Canada to come together as a sponsored community today for the first time as SMCC, which I think is an amazing silver lining for us to think about and be grateful for today. So we're going to go through three different parts of the webinar today, but just a few housekeeping items to start. As you'll notice, you can only see me currently. All participants are basically, videos are off and their lines are muted to avoid background noise and any confusion. The panelists, as they speak, their videos will become available, and obviously there's the screen share that you can see. If you have a Q&A at any time, at the bottom of your viewer window, if you can't see it, just click on the window once. A toolbar will pop up at the bottom. There's actually a little Q&A bubble there, so please insert Q&A, any Q&A you have, right into the bubble. We're going to monitor those dynamically throughout the discussion today, and try to respond to the most common themes, depending on the amount of questions we get, as much as we can before our time runs out today. We'll be doing some interactive polls as well right after Market Watch. Those will pop up right on your screen. Simply just answer, and once everybody has answered, you'll see the results instantaneously on your screen as well. If you have any difficulty in hearing, check your audio settings and speaker settings. That will be, again, if you click on that bottom pop-up in your video and audio icons on the bottom. And if you have any other issues, the Q&A and tech support, please put them right into the chat. We have 3 members from SMCC available to answer any tech issues you're having. So you can put them right into the chat directly, and you can get an instantaneous response and troubleshoot any joining issues. And of course, just one last housekeeping note, we'll be recording today's session, and following this, we'll be distributing the slide decks as well. So you'll be able to rewatch specific sections that you want to go deeper into, or also be able just to look at the deck and make your notes as well. As always, we want to send out a big thank you to our foundational partners. Without these organizations, we wouldn't be able to host these events and initiatives, and especially be able to do and react dynamically to what we're doing today. So we wouldn't have been able to put this together if we didn't have the resources behind us to move as an organization, and that is one of the key factors, and that is having great support of foundational partners, which allows us to have that girth as an association. So greatly appreciated to all of our foundational partners. If you want to get social, at SMCC_CCC on all of our platforms, whether it's following for upcoming events, and I'll be talking about that shortly, about how there'll be more digital-based content rolling out as we're all sheltering in place, as well as just to join the conversation with us. Moving on to the upcoming events slide. We have a few things, specifically, as I mentioned, a few things coming down the pike on what we're going to be doing digitally. So a couple of things we're excited to share with you now. First, we have a virtual informal networking happening on May 28th. So beers and cheers. I'm sure everybody's kind of sick of Zoom at this point, but it'll be another Zoom-based, I assume, kind of gathering, but just more of a talking and connecting and getting to know, getting caught up, nothing formal. We will be doing, for sure, our next webinar in June 17th. And on the esports topic, obviously esports is one of the sectors that has been relatively unscathed by the current epidemic and pandemic. And that's because of the nature of how it lives, through Twitch and mainly on through stream. So we're going to dig into that more specifically and look at, what has this last couple of months meant for them in terms of the evolution of esports and what's next for them. We'll be doing a July webinar as well. And hopefully by August, we'll all be back to some sort of normal, and we'll be conducting our summer social. In addition to those, you'll also be seeing digital content that we can supplement our live webinars with. So next week, 2 of our partners on the research side, IMI and Charlton, will be putting together a synopsis of their top findings from consumers and the sentiments consumers have around the current pandemic situation. And I've seen snippets of both, and it's very, very insightful to see where consumers think this is going to end for them. What are their major concerns? And then going deeper into how do they feel they're going to be able to come back to life, and will they have an appetite to go to events, go to attractions, basically what type of sport, entertainment, cause, arts, literary, etc. things are they looking forward to the most, and how will their spending be affected? So very insightful to see the consumer side of it. And today we're going to try to mirror that a little bit with the industry side of it. What is everybody thinking on our side? One other upcoming thing to mention with the Activate program, co-chairs Brian Collins and Owen Welsh have basically been huddling on this and reworking the program. They're thrilled to report that they're going to be continuing through a digital basis. We basically feel as an organization now it's more important than ever to foster a sense of community and and connection. So stay tuned for more details coming and opening up applications again soon to launch this in a virtual way for this year. From a survey standpoint, I think everybody's always used to us plugging, our survey for feedback. For this particular forum, we have actually, changed the questions up than what you normally see. So if you're getting a little bit of being kind of bored by the same questions over and over again, this is a little bit different. We've added questions about the type of digital content you'd like to see from us, the types of webinars you're basically looking at right now, and what type of content you're looking for, how active you'd like us to be. So if you have time, this will come in the post email with the recording and the slides. We'd really appreciate you taking it, so that'll allow us to inform how much more content and the types of content we put out, following our first webinar today. So without further ado, I'd like to kick it off today with Market Watch. Darren Roberts, EVP Creative Strategy of ANC, Chantel Smith, Manager of Marketing Partnerships with the NBA Canada, both played a large role in bringing this forum together, as well as Corey Moore from the MLSE, who I'd like to thank. The two of them, Darren and Chantel, today are going to take us through a top-line summary of basically what they're seeing out there in the world, what is kind of the most inspiring, and what we can learn from it going forward. So Darren, Chantel, over to you guys.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a little strange, presenting in your kitchen with no reaction. So without further ado, we'll just get right into the deck. If we go to the next slide, please. Just want to start the deck off with, I'm sure everybody's been familiar with the ads that we've seen from all the major brands over the past couple of weeks, and just sort of the fatigue we're seeing around these unprecedented times, ads, and the commitment that these big brands are going to be here with you, during these difficult times. Little bit of humor there, just around the fact that we saw a lot of the same stuff. So if we go to the next slide, what we wanted to do today was just kind of take a look at the opportunity that COVID-19 has presented from a branding perspective. And really looking at the sweet spot between brand communications and doing something meaningful. Of course, we've seen these ads, like I said on that slide before, brand communications, which is really safe, really not offensive, not innovative, Just a reminder that you know, we're here and we're making an ad spend, but also there's been a lot of brands diving in and doing really meaningful things with donations to frontline workers and cash and all that kind of stuff. But what we're looking at today is really the sweet spot between doing something meaningful that communicates some brand value and ideally aligns your efforts with the long-term brand strategy rather than just a moment in time. So looking at really trying to connect with your target audiences in a way that they will hopefully remember once we get out of this pandemic situation. So if we go to the next slide, the first brand we wanted to take a look at was a great example of how a small company, a franchise operation, dove in to really support people during COVID-19. As reports emerged of a rise in cases of domestic violence during the pandemic lockdowns, they made an announcement that they would offer free services to any women and of course anybody who find themselves in a violent situation. They'll move them freely to safe location. They're working directly with shelters and of course the women themselves in every market in which they operate. And if we go to the next slide, they operate in about 140 franchises across the US and Canada. They distributed, of course, a press release, and then they put an announcement out on their social channels. We really thought this mattered because it stands as a great example of how a small business might add value with not a lot of extra resources, but they can provide some in-kind services, but in a way that really delivers some excellent brand equity post-pandemic when people are really looking to potentially book a mover, but also looking for some differentiation between all movers, which, you know, for the most part look pretty much the same. If we go to the next slide, a brand we're familiar with quite at my company, Van City Community Investment Bank. For those of you out west, you'll probably be really familiar with Van City as a brand. The Community Investment Bank actually operates only in Ontario, and they're a pretty new player to the financial services and financial markets in Canada. They operate just in Ontario at this point. They're a subsidiary of the credit union, and they're the only bank exclusively focused on partnering with organizations that drive social, economic, and environmental change. So what they did during the pandemic is they immediately, sorry, let me just take a step back. Because they don't have a consumer base at this point, they're really just working mostly with larger organizations. They couldn't really provide mortgage relief or interest relief or anything like that. But what they could do is they could provide money to the organizations who are operating on the front lines that many of us would have forgotten about in our own crises. So for example, if you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if I'm worried about my own safety, I'm forgetting that there are actually homeless people, or there's, you know, violence against women's shelters. There's lots of these kinds of organizations that immediately lost their funding and their support because everybody sort of hunkered down and started worrying about their own challenges. So instead of being able to reach out to their consumers and say, hey, we're here with you, we're going to provide you some interest relief on your mortgage, they immediately shot some money at 3 organizations in Ontario. One, the Toronto Foundation, and then similar foundations in both Ottawa and Hamilton, providing them money. The key to this is that not only were they demonstrating value to the communities in which they operate, but they were also empowering those people. So rather than earmarking the money themselves and saying, hey, we want you to put this money towards, you know, whatever cause, they actually empowered the organizations, gave them cash and said, you guys decide where this money needs to go based on what your community is telling you. So again, sort of driving brand value that will be memorable to the communities in which they operate post-pandemic. The final brand that I'm going to talk about today is Mattel. I think these guys did a really great job of staying on brand and demonstrating some immediate value. So right out of the gate in April, they debuted Mattel Playroom, which is a one-stop shop with activities and tips for parents on how to work with Mattel or how to play with Mattel brand products. And so what they did is they announced that this would be updated on a weekly basis with more DIY designer tutorials and advice for how to play with kids for all these parents who are now stuck at home, not only homeschooling, but also trying to fill their kids' free time because they have no more activities other than being at home. So this really was excellent because it meets parents where they're at. They also announced the same week that they'd be using the fabric that is typically earmarked for Barbie and Fisher-Price toys. They'd be making masks and PPE equipment for frontline workers. of that fabric and using those factories, which again is sort of an immediate need. Later in the pandemic, and not too long ago, actually a couple of weeks ago, recognizing the emergence of this new type of hero, Mattel debuted a new collection of play figures designed to honor those on the front line, helping keep consumers safe during the pandemic. So the heroes that they launched, this doll series, come in various sizes, and they're modeled after doctors, EMTs, delivery workers, and grocery store workers, which is really kind of a cool way to really provide these parents, again, a toy for their kids to activate with. But also, I really like this one because it was a powerful way for parents to provide kids with a way to maybe kind of rationalize and engage with what's going on in the world around them, and for them to really understand and potentially use play as an activity to really kind of process this sort of concept of a global pandemic with children. So with that, why don't I pass it over to Chantel?
Thanks, Darren. I'll be taking you guys through an additional 3 brands that we thought are just making a really meaningful impact during this moment in time that we're all living through. The first one being Molson, a brand that we are all familiar with. They're an iconic brand, and we know them for their beer. But early on in this pandemic, when we were all sent home to self-isolate, Molson turned a hashtag that we were all quite familiar with, the hashtag virtual happy hour, and spun it for good. So they promoted Canadians to stay home, have their happy hours and drinks with friends and family over Zoom or some kind of video chat, but taking that moment, putting it on Instagram through a photo, using the hashtag, and then tagging Molson Canadian as well as a local bar or restaurant. And Molson would then send the host of that virtual happy hour a $25 gift card to that restaurant that they had tagged. Why we thought that this was impactful was it's just so true to the Molson brand, bringing people together in community. So it also kind of turned into a little bit of a PSA. So promoting people staying home, still connecting with their friends and family, but just in a different way. As well as supporting their partners in local bars and restaurants who unfortunately right now have to close their doors or have a very reduced service offering. So hopefully these $25, these gift cards that Canadians are receiving from Molson are a way to keep these businesses afloat so they do have the opportunity to open their doors again when we're all able to be out and about again. The next brand that we took a look at was McCormick. So most of us are familiar with McCormick with Frank's Red Hot, the French's ketchup and mustard, as well as their Clubhouse spices and herbs. So why we wanted to talk about these guys was they actually took a campaign that they had probably been working on for weeks about Easter and the grilling season being just around the corner, and they actually completely put that campaign on a shelf and pivoted to create a new campaign in a short amount of time that highlights and thanks the frontline workers at food banks, and really showcasing the important work that they're doing day in, day out, and leaving their families every day to help Canadians in need during this point in time. So why we thought this was important and impactful was simply how a part of us were like, this is extremely brave, but they were also very aware that running an ad about grilling season would just come across as very tone deaf and not, applicable to what Canadians and people around the world are going through right now. So it gave them an opportunity to shine a light on a relationship that McCormick has had with Food Banks Canada for many years, as well as thanking and highlighting the great work being done and financially supporting the food banks. So kudos to McCormick for taking that step and really just showcasing the great work that's being done. The last brand that we'll talk about this morning is our friends at McDonald's. So a brand I think we're all familiar with. We know them for their Big Mac, their fries, my personal favorite, McFlurries. But they've been feeding Canadians for years with their thousands of stores across the country. And just last week, they launched a program called Fries for Good. So this is a program where a portion of all of the fries sold between May 8th and 21st will go towards the Canadian Red Cross to support COVID-19 relief programs and just really helping Canadians across the country who need help during this time. Why we thought that this was impactful was the simplicity of it. That Canadians are already buying fries. I know I have done my fair share of ordering during this pandemic. So taking what Canadians already love and using it for a good cause. So I think it's all an opportunity for us to put in our orders for lunch and dinner today and really support the Red Cross. So I'll turn it back over to David.
Amazing. Thank you, Darren and Chantel. So many options to choose from out there, obviously, and the ones that resonate the most, I think, are those that put brand second and cause and community first. So, kind of an interesting takeaway from all that out there. And I personally haven't seen a lot that is surprisingly that is incredibly tone deaf yet. I'm not sure if we have more to come as we start to move through the phase of reopening, but it seems like most brands have been able to toe a good line. Obviously, some have been much more active than others, while others have just kind of waited on the sidelines for things to return to normal. But talking about people getting involved and what the industry is doing, a couple of quick live polls that we wanted to run through and see what the response and the sentiment of the industry is. So first one, we want to know right now, are you planning any activations or have you delivered any activations? Activations in the broadest sense, not marketing, but consumer support, cause support, et cetera, during this pandemic, yes or no? All right, answer should be popping up, I believe. Okay, so 75% of the people on here today, and we have about 300 participants on right now. 75% of those are doing active work right now to respond to the COVID, whereas 25% are not. So pretty good ratio. And obviously we don't know the stats of time what people are doing or not doing, but it's good to see some are active, and those that aren't, likely are maybe not in a position to be active. So it's interesting to see that stat. So the question 2 is more of a sentiment of, would you like to see more? So poll will pop up in a second. And the question is, do you feel more entities need to activate during this time? So do brands need to get more involved? Do more people need to get involved in supporting, whether it's certain causes, certain needs, or their local small business, as we've seen in the Market Watch? Yes or no? All right, so despite 75% of people being involved, and you're not necessarily talking about just us, but the broader marketing and business community out there, majority, 2/3 of attendees today still want to see more from organizations to help during this time. So not unexpected. I think we're all in a similar place where even though there's a lot of good going on, there's still a lot to be done, and there at any given time, anyone has some anxiety or stress towards what the future holds. So definitely the more we can continue to do, the better. Question 3 is, this mirrors some of the consumer sentiment research you're going to see next week. we were curious to know right now, when you're doing your business planning, in your mind, which month are you kind of pegging as when you think COVID will no longer be a concern in your business planning? And obviously, there's varying degrees of when that, what that might take. I think there's a new normal, and then if it ever gets back to a complete normal, we'll see. But right now in your mind, and previewing some of the research I've seen, right now the general consumer sentiment is somewhere between August and October. So curious to see what the industry is thinking from their planning standpoint. Okay, so most have actually pushed right into 2021, which is quite a contrast compared to the consumer sentiment, although I'm sure consumer sentiment is probably more based on when they'll no longer be, in lockdown and sheltering in place, and they'll be able to go back to normal life, whereas business and the economy will obviously take some more time once we open back up to get back together. So for ourselves, we should add in more months into 2021, which we'll do for our next poll. And last question would be looking again ahead to when business gets back to normal. How do you anticipate going into next year, your budgets will be, the budgets you control personally will be impacted? Do you feel they'll be reduced in a significant or somewhat way, stay the same, or increase a lot or a little bit? Okay, and so not unexpected. Most see it somewhat reduced, followed by significantly reduced or stay the same. So probably what I anticipated this response to look like going in. Good to see the data, and we'll see how those change over time as the situation continues to evolve. So now getting into the real core of today's webinar. For those of you who watched it, or if you didn't watch it, for those of you who have heard about it, and you likely have, I'm sure this has 99% brand awareness in Canada right now. Stronger Together 2 Ensemble was a television special in late April that was both a fundraiser for Food Banks Canada, a PSA towards sheltering in place, a support of mental health of all Canadians to show that we're in this together, and a huge thank you to the frontline workers that are putting their own lives and families at risk every day to go out there and to battle this pandemic. If you saw it, over 100 Canadians, musicians, actors, athletes, activists, either shared an inspirational message or performance, or some words to live by during these times. So anyone from Ryan Reynolds to Bryan Adams to Justin Bieber, and the list goes on and on and on. Were part of this special. The special saw 11.5 million viewers, and has raised over 8 million to date for Food Banks Canada. So today we're pleased to bring 2 of the people behind this initiative that can speak from unique perspectives and really give us a sense of how this all came together and what life was like, responding and working towards it. So first we have Tanya Little. She's the Chief Development Officer and Partnerships Officer of Food Banks Canada. She's been with Food Banks for over 7 years, primarily leading the development side of the business. During her tenure, she's grown that fundraising portion by 350%, and I'm sure none has been more visible than the past 8 weeks. So very pleased to have Tanya join us today and share her perspective. And then from the other side of the coin, we have Tyson Parker joining us from Bell Media. Tyson is the head of music and podcasting at Bell, and his primary responsibility is managing the relationships with the artists and talent within the community, and then fusing those with the media products that Bell has. So he has a deep standing relationship with the artist side and the creator side. Prior to joining Bell, he was VP of Communications and Artist Relations at Universal Music Canada. So has been working with the personality side for a very long time, and Tyson was instrumental in really bringing all those inspirational Canadians that were part of the broadcast together and basically bringing them to the table to participate. So it's going to be a very interesting dynamic between the two of them to get both sides today. So Tyson and Tanya, we are super excited to have you join us today.
Awesome. Hi there, everyone. Great to have the opportunity to get together and chat.
Yes, thank you, David. And hello, Tanya, and everybody in my iPad.
So let's go back to like the pre-planning of this. It wasn't, when we had our pre-chat, like it wasn't even a given that Food Banks Canada was going to be the cause necessarily. And Tanya, you mentioned Food Banks as one of 6. So, you know, Tanya, maybe you start. How did it go from this process of we're one of 6 to the country rallying around a universal alignment on food banks as the cause? And how does that really encapsulate everything that's happening in this moment right now?
I love the bigness of that question, and I will say I'll speak from my end, maybe just to open up, because I think Tyson can really speak to the Bell Media side much clearer. We were one of 6 organizations, I believe, that were being examined, national charities that I think people felt there was a deep connection to what was happening on the ground around COVID-19. And we went through a vetting process where we were asked a great deal of questions. Concepts were kind of explored, and then we stepped back from the process while they were working through that internally. I learned quite a bit talking to Tyson around, I think maybe how quickly that rallied, but I want to just hand that over to him for a minute to let him provide his perspective on that.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. I mean, listen, I think the decision came pretty honestly and quickly because, you know, it was an emotional time. The nation was bewildered. Brands, companies were bewildered. I was bewildered. Everyone's families were full of anxiety and fear as to what was actually happening. And what we saw is, you know, the immediate impact that the food bank had to Citizen Canada. Their work, I don't need to go into the greatness of Food Bank, but very authentically, we knew that in regions of smaller regions of Canada and the greater whole of Canada, that they have always been first responders and frontline workers. And we felt that, and again, this is more of a credit to the Food Bank and nothing towards anyone other charitable organizations, but the immediate impact that they provided Citizen Canada made it very easy for us to make that decision. And you know, we knew that people from across the nation were, you know, taking lesser hours, were parts of layoffs, regrettably, and we knew that a lot of anxiety and fear that would, for the first time, a Canadian would have to go to a food bank for the first time. We wanted to make sure that we as a nation were giving the love thy neighbor concept a true meaning.
Thanks for that, Tyson. I mean, I will say at that time, we, like everyone else, I think we're trying to react to the situation. You know, we had seen an 80% decline in volunteers, which is pretty huge for an organization that relies so heavily on volunteer services. And we were already starting to see our numbers spike. So at that point, I think we were sitting at about a 20% increase in the number of clients we were seeing. So again, pre-COVID, we were seeing Canadians visit food banks about 1.1 million times a month, and we'd already seen a 20% increase at that point. You know, as of today, we're over 30, and we don't believe we're done. Like, we think those numbers are still climbing. So I appreciate that there was, I think, a real insight just to, you know, how food banks were responding to Canadians' individuals' like experience at the time, trying to be able to support them through a moment that, you know, no one wants to ask for help. We're all scared, we're all confused, but food banks were there to ensure people weren't hungry. So great that that was a starting place.
Yeah, I mean, listen, people need, you know, and you provide service to every corner of this nation.
Absolutely. Yeah, the coast to coast to coast element, I do think was probably something that was a bit unique. I mean, we work most closely with 650 organizations on the ground, but in actuality, we work with another 3,000 agencies through those food banks. And so literally in every province, in every territory, from the most north to the most west, south, you know, like east. We're right there on the ground. And so, you know, we do kind of have that pulse check on what's happening in every local market. And we were seeing the differences in every market and how they were responding. So the opportunity to come together with Bell Media, but also with all of the networks, was a very unique point in time to be able to, I think we were all trying to rally around supporting those frontline workers, and food banks being one of them, but not the only ones that were being thanked and appreciated. So I don't want to lose sight of that. But there was this opportunity to just be real together, connect back together with what are we about as Canadians, what makes this nation unique and beautiful, and how could we tell and weave a story that would inspire the nation to come together.
Yeah, and if I may, David, we are now at 8.6 million raised and counting. So it's we've gone past the 11 million mark.
Amazing, amazing. And I think what was so insightful and where it all kind of another level clicked for me when we had our pre-conversation is the intersection of kind of economic impact and unemployment, food insecurity, and also mental health. And that's something that, you know, Food Banks Canada at the surface level doesn't necessarily say to me, but then as you dig into it and you look at how many people are in a situation where they're losing their jobs right now and what that means also for mental health and food insecurity, you know, Tanya, you had some pretty, and Tyson, both some pretty insightful stats of how those all really fit together and make food banks kind of the, you know, the nexus of a lot of what's happening.
Well, I will say, you know, a little later on, I know we're going to share some of our key learnings, but I will say we've known from well before this where and how mental health, unemployment, poverty, housing insecurity, mobility challenges, how all of these pieces intersect and in fact get multiplied. And right now you add on fear, social isolation, and for a lot of people, the lack of ability to, you know, go places and get access to program services and supports. You know, to me, you kind of have a hurricane of fear. It's a nexus point that I think that we're seeing a lot of Canadians hit. And I will say, I think we're very cognizant that this universal experience that we're all living through, while it's both raised our attention and awareness of how real the issues around food access and security are for us as a nation, like from our own production manufacturing lens, but also what happens when that's threatened. What does that mean for our population? How do we care for all of our neighbors? What are the potential implications from a societal lens? I mean, I don't want to over-intellectualize this. That's not really what the purpose of this is, but I will say, you know, this work is deep and complex. The reason why we still have food banks, which Ryan Reynolds summed up perfectly, like, I want to be out of business. We all want to be out of business, but we can't be right now because this is a very complex, wicked problem. And I will say what we've come to understand very, very clearly is that as we get through this universal and shared experience that we're having, there are going to be very long-term societal impacts that we're going to have to address. And mental health and fear and anxiety are going to be massive, massive issues that are going to have, you know, ripple effects for years to come.
Yeah, here. You said that perfectly, Tanya. And, you know, Bell, obviously, through Let's Talk, is feet on the ground 365 days a year. And once this curve the virus curve is getting to a flattened state, there's another curve that will raise its ugly head. And, you know, in everyday life, people struggle. And back to my point about why we chose food banks, you know, I think the mental state of the nation is going to be a heck of a challenge facing us all. And, you know, the sustenance that food banks will provide those people to retain health, that will work towards their own mental health, and the work that Let's Talk does, and Mary Deacon, who runs that for us, is an immense human being. And the work that we're doing with CAMH is very real and heartbreaking. And in this moment, you know, we needed to make sure that was, you know, part of the narrative here.
For sure. So we can spend all day, I'm sure, talking about the importance of, you know, of every person we're impacting and how we can, you know, continue to further that. But I want to kind of take us down now and start drilling into the actual it coming together a bit. So 2 weeks time, this thing doesn't exist. There's no such thing as Stronger Together. 14 days later, it's on, 44 networks and working with 360 partners, hundreds of Canadian personalities. Kind of walk us through the beginning to kind of the end. Like, how did it go from an idea to a broadcast, and what were the series of evolutions on the way?
You want me to start?
Yeah, please.
So, listen, there were two other events that happened in front of ours. That was the iHeartRadio Elton John special, which was raising money for the Red Cross, and had a bunch of living room concerts that really brought awareness to the frontline workers. Following that was the Global Citizen event, where again, similar premise, a whole bunch of concerts from living rooms from celebrity. I think, if I'm being completely honest, there was we had the blessing of actually going third, not by choice, but just because we wanted to think about this a little bit. And I think the world was becoming a little bit over celebrities. I think people were a little tired of hearing, not to disparage in any way, the Taylor Swifts of the world telling you to stay home and a beautiful mansion across the world. So what we did is worked with the creator community of Canada and the everyday people of Canada to create a program that would not just shine a light on the incredible musicians. And I must say that I feel personally that creators, authors, musicians, and actors have always been in our nation the first to put their hand up. They have never shied away from tough work and tough narrative. It was not a difficult, it seems difficult, it wasn't. We put an APB out to iconic Canadians. Randy Lennox, who runs Bell Media, had a conversation with John Brutton, and very quickly we engaged the other broadcasters. Even before we had a single person booked, we were dealing with other broadcasters, the other four partners being Chorus and Rogers and the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation ourselves. And it was a real testament to the Sam Robertses and the Michael Bublé's and the Bare Naked Ladies to be able to put their hand up, and in tough times, because they're people too, and they're having to deal with their families and having to deal with isolation, came up with a creative narrative that was both funny, lovable, and really steeped in authenticity about helping not just the frontline workers of Canada, but to throw a virtual group hug around the entire nation to make sure that we're feeling okay in this. Back to my earlier point, we didn't know what was happening. We still, to a degree, don't. And I would also put journalists in those frontline workers because without the narrative that we have in this country, journalistically, we would be completely uninformed. And we'll keep our friends to the south out of this conversation. But, I think journalists across the nation have done an incredible job of sharing in fact in what we're supposed to do. So, contrary to what the popular belief might be, it wasn't that difficult. And that is a testament to the Creator Society of Canada. Once we found who we wanted to be inside this program, Insight took over. I cannot sing their praises enough. Again, all of this took place from living rooms and dining rooms and basements and bedrooms to compile originally a 60-minute program, which very quickly became 90 minutes because of the absolute love affair that the creator community had with this. So it was a big lift, but one that we did with real authenticity and ease, and all of that credit goes to, firstly, the broadcasters, and along with Insight, and I think most importantly, the creator nation of Canada, because they wanted to help.
Yes. So I would just echo kind of everything that Tyson just shared, and add that outside of being blown away by every major media partner coming together on this and the creator community, I also could not say enough in awe things of Lindsay Cox and the team at Insight Productions, because not only were they working with the creator community, but they brought us in to a certain extent as part of that co-creation team. They had, like lots of us do, I think, preconceived notions of what food insecurity and food banking looked like in the country. And it was through deep exploration and a lot of phone conversations and video chats that they grew to understand our work in a much deeper way. And I would say pivoted in a really short time frame to invite us in to be part of that co-storytelling. We worked with the Food Banking Network across Canada to be able to bring together 7 unique stories in 7 different markets on top of 2 that they'd already collected. And I thought they unified it together. They wove it together into this beautiful quilt that had the creators at the center, but had the food banks being featured along with healthcare workers and grocery store clerks and everybody who's serving the front line in a really cohesive and genuine way. Like, I felt our brand, our essence, and the community was seen in its most true form. By no means perfect. We're all just kind of doing the best we can every day, trying to get through this collective shared experience of doing, and recognizing that, that's just shifting all the time. But I will say, I felt it was a real partnership. It was a deep partnership. And to go from really having, we'd been interviewed by Bell Media and some of their channels, but to go from kind of that very, passive journalistic relationship to really a true partner in the creation of something beautiful was, for me, I know it's going to be a once in a career kind of an experience. And I felt very fortunate to go through it with such a passionate, dedicated group of people.
And David, I think you said it quite nicely earlier on, that it, for everybody, was cause before brands. Everybody checked their egos at the door, and with the healthy competition that the broadcasters have throughout the nation, we were cognizant of that. They were cognizant of that, and everyone really contributed honestly and fairly to the actual cause, and didn't try to prioritize their own get. So it was a magical moment, and as Tanya said, that I am truly honored to have played a role at whatever size in creating something that is and was or continues to be a pretty magical charitable moment for our nation. The virtual group hug that we all showed each other, it was pretty outstanding.
Mm-hmm. And as I hear more of how it all came together, I mean, it's one of those uniquely Canadian things that makes you proud to be Canadian, because it's one of those things that can almost only happen here. Like Tyson, you mentioned when reaching out to whether it's Ryan Reynolds, Justin Bieber, Drake, Bryan Adams, Shania Twain, whoever it is, Celine Dion, there was no question about when, where, who, compensation. It was immediate yes. How can I get involved?
Listen, writers and musicians and actors live on a real edge every single day. That's my point about them being frontline workers. 99% of them live below a poverty line, and even the semi-successful ones. And their hands went up instantly. The fact that we went from 60 to 90 is a testament to them, that they wanted to help the people that help put food on their table every single day. And I think if anyone on this call is looking for ways to market differently going forward, I would use musicians and writers and actors and creators, because they are the most authentic you can possibly get, and they shed their own skin through. This wasn't about celebrity. This was about Citizen Canada, and that is the narrative piece that I think really stood out for me most. And I think going forward, hopefully, brands will be able to understand and appreciate that. The musicians, their lives have been decimated. Like, their livelihoods have been completely eviscerated. They can't tour, and the people who work for artists are no longer making money. Drum techs, tour managers, they're all sitting at home right now, very likely having to use the food bank, so it meant a lot to them. And I think that authenticity and that realness going forward should be shown once this curve is flattened and a different one rises on the creator community of our nation, because they do provide us with a way out of sorrow, and we can never forget that. We can never forget that.
Yeah. And I think you've even seen that they were some of the first to react by doing at-home concerts, even on Instagram Live. Like, it was the creator community that was some of the first to get back and start to contribute back and help as much as they could. Tanya, there was a bunch of firsts, kind of switching gears a little bit. There was a bunch of firsts that came out of this. One of them would be probably the first time your website has crashed. So take us to that night when you're running around and find out that we've sent too many Canadians to donate at a single time and the whole thing's down.
Yeah, pretty much every fundraiser's worst nightmare on the face of the planet. But I will say, and I've had to say this a few times, like we actually did everything right. Like, you work with the banks, you work with the financial processors, you get bandwidth, you work with all your website managers. Like, everything was ready to go. But there really isn't a website in Canada that can handle 50,000 people trying to make a donation at one time. And that's literally what happened from the first moment the first show started until the last moment it entered on the West Coast. So we literally went through a 5.5 hour window of just blurring of people trying to reach in and donate. And just in fairness to us, it crashed both our website and the Mobile Giving Foundation's website or text to give capabilities. So we had just as many people trying to text to give as we did trying to donate online, and people were trying to use both. But I will also say I want to give a shout out to my team, because I do work with one of the best teams in the country. We may be small, but we are mighty as hell. And our team of 30, we had 24 people that activated, picked up the phone and started talking to donors. And took donations over the phone that night for 6.5 hours. And then for every day, 12 hours a day for the next week, to be able to respond to the donors who were reaching into us to support our work. So there were millions of firsts that I don't think will be replicated. And I want to just come back really quickly to a point on the creator community that Tyson was just talking about. When Food Banks Canada made the decision to launch its campaign 8 weeks ago, the day we were making the decision, we received our very first campaign contribution, which was from Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively. And they were not doing it as Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively. They were doing it as two people, one Canadian, one American, who cared extremely deeply about the issue of food security. They felt very privileged as people that had means, and they wanted to give back. And I will say that really kick-started a frenzy of activity with the creator community in Canada, whether it was the Bare Naked Ladies or the Arkells or the cast of Schitt's Creek. But what became very evident to us was how real, how genuine, how deeply people wanted to engage. And I also want to just concur with Tyson that this is not about celebrity. This is about people who live close to the edge in many cases, or have, and get this issue in a real way and wanted to use their voice and their agency. And we were really surprised through the show, speaking of first, or connecting us back to your point, David, how many people self-identified with living in poverty or needing to use food banks or growing up using food banks. And we did not ask anybody to kind of out themselves. This was a choice for them to be vulnerable with Canadians, to share their story, to make it very real, and maybe even to speak to the value of the services that they may have had access to at some point in their life. So I think that was a first that really took us back, because we just didn't know it was going to happen. And we were really kind of gobsmacked by how heartfelt everybody's messages were. So just so poignant, so real. I also just think oh, sorry, Tyson, were you going to jump in?
No.
Okay, I was going to say, so outside of things like, the website crashing or it being the largest text to give campaign in text to donate campaign in Canadian history, I want to say one of the things that was surprising was that Canadians took pride in crashing our site. We laughed quite hysterically the next couple of days looking through Instagram, Twitter, Facebook to see that Canadians were like, good on us, we crashed them with our generosity. It was amazing. When would that ever, think about it as a brand, when would it ever imagine from a customer service lens that a massive mishap would turn into this beautiful opportunity to connect in the realest way with your donors? I'm going to give you the most shocking first for us. we're, as an organization, we're a national body. We've worked with national and multinational brands since our inception. We are not really an organization that's been focused on individual giving. Out of this program, 165,000 donors made the choice to support Food Banks Canada for the first time. That is 165,000 people who've said, I care about your cause and I want to make a difference, and this impacted me. I felt inspired and I'm giving back. If you want to think about a legacy to be able to give, this partnership created a legacy with the creator community, with Canadians, and creating a cohesive message to connect as human beings with each other, an opportunity to tell stories differently. And I also want to highlight, I'm sure those of you who are brands noticed, there wasn't a commercial. Like, this was not a commercial venture for anybody. And we work with over 200 brands, and not one of them was featured in this show. And that's because that's not what the show was about. That's not what the incredible media partners put together. That's not what the creators wanted. They wanted to share their voice and tell stories and connect with music and be real. And I really love Tyson, the visual. Like, it really did feel like a hug around the nation to connect us in such a real way. So for me, those were all firsts from my perspective that I think are maybe worth highlighting.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, I echo that, and I can assure you the company which I work for, we are in the business of selling advertising space, as are Rogers and Chorus and the CBC. To echo what Tanya has just said, it was never in question, that we never put ourselves, and again, David, cause before brands was really kind of the theme of the day. And, we just ran with it, and it was never in question. We made the decision, there's no advertising, it's commercial free, let's just move forward, and it just got it straight out of the room. And I would say that the crashing of your site is, as the Newfies would say, is a good bad.
Yeah, it for sure was. And I mean, believe me, we're 2.5 weeks later, we're still in cleanup mode because, 165,000 first-time donations is a lot of connection points when you're trying to reconcile data. But I will also say I've probably had some of the deepest and most heartwarming conversations with donors that I've ever had in my 25 years as a fundraiser. There's been lots of laughter, lots of tears, lots of people just sharing, my kids have lost their job, or my niece did, or we are ourselves going to have to use the food bank. Like, just real connection points of deep humanity. And I will say, this partnership, outside of doing all of the good that it did, from our own brand lens, I also think really provided a deep level of credibility to our brand, and really helped people understand like our USP, our raison d'etre, all of those pieces in a way that we could never have told on our own. So that's, again, part of that legacy that continues to give, because now as we engage with continued conversations with partners, the conversation is rich, it is deep, it is meaningful, it is not one-sided, and so I think that there's lots of pieces that feed into the learnings.
Amazing. We're having questions rolling in, so if you've been waiting to submit questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your toolbar. Tanya, this one's for you. Obviously a lot of the attendees here are sponsorship professionals or have sponsored their portfolio. So the question is around, one, what are some of the most authentic programs you've seen with some of the brands you're working with? Outside of this being commercial free, how have brands also stepped up, and what are some of the highlight programs you've been working on?
I feel like that's being asked to choose which of my children is the favorite. And that feels like it's a double-edged sword for me. I think what I want to be able to say is we've had both the benefit of being able to work with extremely long-standing partners. So I'm going to name a few, like Questrade or Mccormick's or Kellogg's or General Mills. Like, we have lots of companies that we had really long-established relationships with that I think have stepped up even more, have deepened their engagement, and are really working on smart, creative campaigns, and they are the organizations who get it is the story first, and it is the connection point of humanity first, that it's not about pitching X, Y, Z. So I just would say there's lots of those folks. And then I would say there's been some very cool, you know, new and different kinds of partners that maybe we didn't have before, but were, you know, companies that we were really excited to be able to have conversations with. And I would just say, like the Hudson's Bay Foundation. I'm looking right now, I'm looking off to the side here, I'm looking at this like long list of incredible partners. I'm thinking of organizations like Purolator and the CFL, and I will say one of the really interesting things that happened from our perspective is we're working with almost every professional sports team in some capacity right now on really kind of interesting and different initiatives, and that's been, again, really inspiring to be able to do. I will probably say the one campaign that's brought me to tears the most, and pretty much every time I watch it that brings me to tears, is the Cheerios Spot. So they developed a custom, they've illustrated a commercial telling the story of Murray the food banker, and that is an actual food banker from the Kitchener-Waterloo region, and that story could not have been told more beautifully to sum up really what all frontline workers do, not just food bankers, but what it means to be on the ground to put community first. So I was really blown away by that one.
Amazing. So part B, there was a part B to that question, and it's actually something we talked about as a group at the end of our kind of pre-meeting, which was, we talked about the takeaways. So what can everybody take away from this? If you want to be a brand getting involved in COVID, you know, supporting. And we talked about kind of, this is a magical bubble. Like you can't recreate it. It's lightning in a bottle. It isn't something that you can just set out to do on your own. You know, you need all this kind of, this serendipitous coming together of so many partners just looking to do good. But I think we did talk about a bit about after, well, starting now, the need isn't over and the hurt isn't over. You know, so we're still haven't flattened the curve. And then no one knows what happens once we do, but there could be future outbreaks and spikes until there's a vaccine. There's economic recovery. There's mental health, as Tyson mentioned. You know, so the needs of Canadians will not have changed. And we talked about how, you know, one of the kind of the key learnings from that is that this may be a shift in marketing where you can't really be brand first, as we've mentioned a couple of times. You really have to be cause first and very, very careful on where brand even fits in for the indefinite future until, you know, there's some sort of normalcy back in the world. You know, Tanya, maybe you start and then, you know, include Tyson on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I think a bit earlier there was the term, I think it was, and I hope I have your name right, Darren, tone deaf, right? Like I think right now, all of us need to be really careful about how we tread. We're dealing with a lot of fragility, and I don't mean that in a flippant way. I mean that in, this is scary stuff. There's a lot of unknowns, and I think it's weighing on each of us very, very differently. So I think as brands, as partners, as people who hold activations, like we just need to be really thinking about the very human side of what we're looking to do and tell. But I will say, I think for those partners, whether they be brands or the activation holders, you know, you really have to know yourself, know your brand, know your USP, know what and how you want to partner and what that alignment can be. And then from the charity side or the partner side, like, know what the no is. Like, and I mean the no meaning NO, because we have not accepted every partnership that's walked through the door because they didn't always align with our values or our culture or from a messaging lens. And I think the other thing is, I think part of the reason outside of Stronger Together, which again, I agree, David, we're not going to be able to just replicate things like that, and they shouldn't be, but it was something special. But beyond that, with the partners we're working with, you know, we are really just focused on demonstrating leadership and agility. So having the ability to pivot and have flexibility and bring your best selves to what partnership can be, because it's not always just about money. And I think that for brands who are thinking, well, how do I even engage in this space? I think be willing to come with all of the assets that you as a brand hold. So your intellectual assets, your goods, your services, as well as what your products or offering are, because I think you might be surprised at how those partnerships could be scaled and grown with the sector. The social sector is they're very creative thinkers, and they will want to work with you to tell a story that's meaningful to both. I would say, for those of you who still come where it's all about you, don't be surprised if the partnerships don't happen, because it truly needs to be co-created. I think the success going forward will be co-creating and working collaboratively. I think that's where you'll see greater success.
Yeah, I completely agree. And don't assume that you know more than who your audience actually is, because they're really fragile in this moment, and having an appreciation for them and not trying to over heartstring them is also key. I think we've seen a few campaigns that have come up where it's just a little bit, I'll keep the names out of it, but been a little bit grotesque and opportunistic in trying to create a narrative that is pulling on a heartstring. And I think, everyone on this call is very smart, and they'll have recognized that. This is the new world that we're living in, and I think most importantly, you're going to have to understand who your audience is more than ever, not just analytically, but emotionally. If I could just add that before we got into this piece, David, you asked what things that we're doing outside of Stronger Together. And what we've done with the iHeart brand is to continue to work with the creators on a living room session and also a story time session, whereby iconic Canadians will be reading to or doing the work of some parents reading their kids to bed through our Instagram and our socials. So Jackson Triggs and our good friends at Jackson Triggs have been pretty incredible in recognizing that everyone is exhausted, and they've contributed to a campaign that is directly for kids, and taking a Sam Roberts and singing a lullaby, or going through a Dickens story to kind of help the parents in this moment. So when I say that, it's trying to understand who your audience is, recognize that everyone is on their back foot, recognizing that everybody is in a very fallowed state, and that we're all working from Zoom while parenting, and there is an exhaustion that has set in. And people really don't want to have things jammed down their throat. And you can pull on a heartstring, but don't over-pull. I think it's important.
No, I think that's incredibly bang on, and very crucial to anybody going forward. But it also kind of shows me the other side of it is, Tanya, you mentioned you're 30 people, total. You're not one of the top, 3 biggest charities in the country. But the agility and the ability to respond, yes, it was a unique situation, but one of the key factors for you on your side was being agile and being able to move and engaging your entire population. And it reminds me kind of a proverb I always think about, which is, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. If you want to help, jump in. It's not too late. There are so many causes out there, whether it's small business, it's mental health, it's food insecurity. There's so many people needing right now that, you can make a difference, and everyone that does come forward with, just the intent to make the difference, will make a difference. And I think, Tyson, if you come forward with just that, that idea of, I'm here just to make a difference, you'll toe the balance of being too brandy versus being cause focused as well, and not too over emotional. So, I think that was one of the key things I took from it as well. Made so many things we want to talk about. I want to do a fun one-ish if possible. Favorite clip or segment from the show, and then also, I know we didn't talk about this pre-call, but I always kind of like asking this question, so throw it out there. Funniest kind of behind-the-scenes moment, if there was one for you, like whether it was some crazy conversation you had with one of the creators or others. So Tanya, start with you, and then Tyson, because you might have a really good one if you can think about it that might be funny and witty.
Yeah, I mean, my absolute favorite clip was Ryan Reynolds, and not because he became a personal donor, but because, and Tyson was actually really surprised when I shared this before on our pre-call, but he wasn't scripted. And if any of you watched or saw or rewatched the clip with Ryan Reynolds, it was as though I'd given him the exact words that I wanted him to say out loud about our cause, about our mission, about our focus, about what we're looking to do. And he encapsulated it. And, you know, the bit of a running joke was like, oh, well, he's an actor. And it's like, no, this is a man that, you know, I'm in regular contact with because he's a donor. And I've been sharing information, and he and Blake have been asking questions and engaging deeply. They care. And so he took the time to go out and learn and educate and bring that in. And I mean, that to me was beyond special. That's the moment of connection you hope to have with every donor that you work with, that they will get what you do and what you're about. So for me, that was a really special piece. You know, it's a minute and 3 seconds, and it was a pretty powerful moment for us.
Great moment, and that's a testament to who he is. I mean, that's again the theme of the program is authenticity, and he did that, as his wife did too. Yeah. For me, that's just all great. But I thought the way that the Michael Bublé Bare Naked Ladies thing came together was really interesting, and they had this great skiffly song that they banged out, and seeing some of the footage of them having to work through it all was really interesting. And the collaboration was really heartwarming, and the song is amazing. And I would also say that Will Arnett's outtakes were outstanding. And man, the guy is very funny, and his wife Amy, and I thought they were very clever and very fun. And he's relentless with not dropping the Toronto Maple Leafs into everything that he does, which is kind of funny. I would think that another magical moment that ended the program, not Drake, but the video for Lean On Me with our great partners at Sony Music was really heartwarming in how quickly that came together, putting, you know, too many to count musicians in their separate rooms and living rooms, and creating a rendition of a really, really powerful song, a Hall of Fame classic song. The cadence of it was perfect. And the video of it heartwarming and beautiful. So, you know, I thought it was a really nice way to end our program, and even more heartwarming to know that the song has gone on to become the #1 track in the nation, and raising money for, not the food bank, but for the Red Cross, who we play nicely with as well. So, you know, Will Arnett and his wife Amy being funny as shit, certainly with the outtakes. Bare Naked Ladies and Bublé, and the way that they came up with a really great track, and certainly the Lean On Me song from our partners at Sony was truly heartwarming. Those would be the 3 moments.
Cool. So coming in an hour and 15, so I want to kind of wrap it up with one final question here. You know, what's next for each of you? You know, as you now are back to, you know, not working on Stronger together. You know, what does your day-to-day look like, and what are you working on right now?
About 7 Zoom calls a day. I don't understand the need to see inside of everyone's house, but here we are. I don't know. We're just, you know, listen, I'm working through podcasting and how that world has been completely turned upside down. Analytically, we have learned that, you know, podcasting is starting to recover a little bit. It's certainly something that people listen to while in transit to and from things, most importantly, work every morning and evening. So we're trying to come up with a cadence that, in a narrative that properly suits the Bell Media Studios productions that we're doing in the podcasting space. So it's really interesting. It's making me smarter. The hustle is real, and we're just trying to figure it out. You know, we've seen that there's been, in the news side of things, a bit of COVID fatigue. We created 2 amazing podcasts, one with Lisa LaFlemme and one from our friends at Newstalk 1010, that have provided the nation with a daily commentary about what to do and to not do. We've been very focused on not bringing our anything other than fact to those pods, and we're getting a great response to that. I feel like I'm just leaning into the screen now. And so that's keeping us busy. You know, again, the business model with podcasting has been niche. It was starting to grow. It's been turned upside down. It's growing back. So the learnings that I'm coming out with have inspired me and are filling 7 days a week for me.
And for us, I would say we mentioned a bit earlier that, you know, to date with the campaign sitting at about 8.6 million as far as the Stronger Together, but there is a lot of halo that program has had. So we are working on some really exciting next level partnerships that'll be announced in the next few weeks. And I think beyond that, we also realized that there was a deep desire for Canadians to want to get involved and activate. So yesterday we launched the next phase of our campaign, which is called I8.ca, as in I ate a meal. And that is an opportunity to allow Canadians to step up themselves and give in a different way to support their neighbors, invite their friends and family, or celebrate occasion. And so we're really focused on continuing to connect with individual Canadians who care about this issue and work really creatively with partnerships to continue to identify ways to tell the story. I think just as a really unique point, I mean, we're all starting to pivot a little bit, right? We're all recognizing that as community starts to open up a bit, we're trying to understand what that new reality is. I know from the food banking lens, this is not an issue that's going to go away. If we go up by 30 to 50%, that's a whole lot more people that we're going to have to be able to provide support to on the long term. So I think we're really going to continue to look at how we tell the story and how we help Canadians understand the impact of supporting their neighbors through this crisis. So that's where we are. And I just want to, David, take one more second to just say, sure, we would not have been able to do this had it not been for partnership. So for all the brands that we work with, for all the individual donors we work with, and a special shout out to Tyson because he's obviously on the call, but without the creator community and the networks all being willing to come together in a unified way and in partnership, this wouldn't have happened. So a huge, huge thanks to them for their commitment and dedication and hard work. To go from 0 to 100 in 2 weeks is craziness, and they did it. Everyone pulled out the stops. They worked 24/7 to make it happen. So just huge thanks to the Bell Media team and all the networks that we worked with.
Thank you, Tanya. And I would say the same to you for always, every single day, even post-COVID, for being there for Canadians. So you should be applauded. Your work is endless. So thank you. It was an honor to work with you and your organization in the incredible things that you do for our nation every single day.
Amazing, guys. Well, thank you guys both for so much for joining and sharing the story. And I think at the end there, if there's one kind of key, my pleasure. And I think if there's, one kind of key takeaway at the very end there that I thought was, really bang on is there's so much, it has to be on our terms, our brand, but when you kind of check that at the door and you come together in a spirit of partnership, you can create something that's larger than the sum of its parts sometimes and is way better than you could ever done on your own. So will we continue to heed that lesson going forward? We'll see, but obviously in this instance, it's a glowing example of when you come forward with the right intentions and cool resources, you can do something amazing. Thank you both again so much. And to the community, thank you for joining us today. We'll be back in at least a month, but maybe sooner with more webinar content from the SMCC. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.